Thank you, Kerry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our May webinar. Thank you so much for joining Barry and I for this really important discussion about return to work issues. However, and wherever your people have been working over the last year and this year, there have been huge challenges, but from challenges comes opportunities. Reopening our workplaces will take planning and also communication, but if we adopt the government's cautious but irreversible approach, there is much to consider both in the short and the long term. But what we can say is that those businesses, those employers that start planning now for how they want or expect their workplaces to look now and in the future, they will be better placed to meet those challenges. So as I said, I'm really pleased to be joined by my colleague Barry Stanton today. Barry's partner and also head of our employment team here at Boyce Turner. Morning, Barry.
Hello, Emma. Good morning, everybody.
And for those who don't know, Boyce Turner, we are a commercial law firm based in the Thames Valley. We look after clients in the Thames Valley across the UK and also globally. And our employment team offers HR support to employers, litigation support, immigration support. We also help with coaching and training. And I'm going to be telling you about some really exciting virtual training opportunities for your leaders and your wider employee populations as we go through today's session.
But just before we start, a little bit of admin. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. And if you could post those questions into the chat box, that would be great. If we have time, we'll deal with questions at the end. If not, then what we'll do is we'll deal with the FAQs, and we'll send those out in a couple of days' time once we've had a chance to answer them. Or if you have questions after the webinar, please get in touch either with me or with Emma, and we'll be very pleased and happy to try and answer your questions. I also wanted to stress that this is really an overview based on what we know at the moment. And as we've all seen over the last 15 months, it's a moving feast almost every day. So, if you do need specific advice, then you really need to come and take specific advice.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Barry, before we sort of begin talking about some of the employer issues, where are we in terms of returning our people to site?
Well, we're still working under the work from home unless you cannot order, although the if you cannot part of it has evolved over time to include those who cannot perform their job because of the nature of their work, so people in retail or construction, but also it now includes those who need to come to the workplace for other reasons, such as for better health. Mental well-being has been a big issue. So if they have those sort of issues, they can also come. In terms of when the order might change, the government has confirmed that guidance to work from home where possible will remain in place until 21st June at the earliest. And 7 days before that, they're proposing to have a review of the situation, and they'll publish the latest advice and guidance on working from home at that point. But social distancing and other measures stay in place until then. And I suppose a lot of that's going to be driven by what happens with the Indian variant. And then also we had yesterday Mr. Cummings popping up and making various criticisms of the government. So that might influence how they go forward.
Absolutely, yes. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, firstly, we're going to touch on some of the practical issues of returning people to site. Then we're going to be having a look at some of the health and safety and also the well-being issues as well, and looking at some of those reassurances that we can give to our people at what is for some a very anxious time. Then we'll be talking about whether we will be ditching the flex or embracing our new flexible working and hybrid working environment. So we'll have a chat about that and share some statistics with you as well. Also want to touch on this subject, this idea of the rise of the tribe. It'd be quite interesting to hear from some of you if you're sensing some sort of, are you an in or are you an out sort of creeping in. I also want to touch on around sort of health information, health data, vaccinations. There's lots of discussion going on about that, and I know that's something that HR teams are looking at the moment. So we'll have a look at sort of testing and vaccinations and information more generally, and what are the risk areas with that. Also, we'll have a discussion about contracts and policies. What should we be looking at? What should we be looking at now? Maybe in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. So we'll have a chat with you about that, and then just a general talk about culture and where this has potentially sort of left our businesses and our levels of employee engagement. So lots to get through this morning, but what we wanted to touch on first of all was really talking about some of the practical issues that maybe you're thinking about now, and certainly as we move forward and we think about, sort of post-June 2021. And it's made difficult, of course, as Barry said, because simply a lot of this is all still up in the air. But I expect that a lot of what we saw last year when we were returning people to site will continue. So bringing people back on those staggered hours, those flexible hours, having staggered start times, finish times, maybe looking at staggered rest breaks during the working day. But, it's not going to be easy. But I think the main issue is really to give your staff, give your people as much notice as you can do about what returning to work will look like, and also when you expect to be, reintroducing people back to the workplace. And I think, the more time you can give people to readjust will also help with them making their own return to work arrangements. Barry, anything to add on that?
Well, I think that's really important, giving people time to make the adjustments and think. But also with returning to site, businesses are going to need to think about whether they have the support functions to allow staggered working hours or a more flexible approach. For example, how are your IT teams going to cover that? What about cleaning and security? Do you need to flex those hours as well? Will any workplace changes lead to changes in contracts of employment? If they will, then does a business need to think about how it's going to manage that, and how are staff going to change their shift patterns, even if they're going to change them temporarily? So what are the contractual issues around all of that? And we need to remember that when changing contracts for large numbers of people, there are consultation provisions which apply. So we need to think about that in good time and whether those consultation provisions will apply. And that's going to depend on how you plan to make those changes if people don't want to make those changes voluntarily. So if changing hours or pay is a formal alternative to redundancy, or if the change will be made by dismissing and re-engaging, that could trigger collective consultation obligations.
No, absolutely. And I think, the other point is that, communication and messaging is going to be a huge part of this reintegration and return to work. And I think some employers are also going to have to talk to and negotiate and consult with trade unions as well. So again, we need to factor that into our communication planning. And also think about, who we're going to bring back to work as well, thinking there about our furlough employees. How are we going to do that fairly? What's that going to look like? A point that was raised in another forum I was discussing this was about individuals who have second jobs. Individuals on furlough have taken second, maybe third jobs. So what are we going to do about that? And again, this idea of giving employees as much notice as we can do to make those arrangements with other employers is obviously going to make the process much smoother, and obviously sort of keep that communication between your employees and your furloughed members of staff as well. So again, communicate early, and again, this will help with that process.
I think it's also important to think about expectations moving forward and how this might be formed in discussion with your people. Now's a really great time to think about your future workplace, and the space you're occupying. Consider what's worked really well over the past year and what hasn't. What can be improved? How can we replicate team meetings if we're working in a hybrid environment with people, potentially some people in the office, some people at home? Do we need to have check-ins and check-outs at the beginning and end of meetings to keep people engaged? One of the things that I've found talking to people that work on a flexible part-time basis is that they found this year, when everybody's been working from home all the time, they felt much more engaged and in tune with everybody else because they haven't felt isolated in the same way. Whereas, if we go back to a working environment where people are part-time at home and other people are more full-time in the office, they may again feel they've become disenfranchised. So that's really important. And ensuring our juniors have sufficient development and mentoring time. How are we going to deal with them if they're not in the office? How have we been dealing with them? Has that worked? So careful planning and early communication is going to be really, really important for all of this.
Yeah, and as well as those sort of practical issues as well, you know, we're going to have to think about health and safety, and also the well-being of our people as well. And yes, you know, we have and we expect to have COVID-19 health and safety rules, but remember that these sit alongside general health and safety obligations, this, you know, keeping your staff, you know, taking those reasonable steps to protect the health and safety of your people. So, you know, those general risk assessments, but also we will be looking at those COVID-19 risk assessments as well, and doing that in consultation with your employees as well. So they're aware of what's going on, they understand what the new regimes are going to look like, particularly around sort of hygiene and hand washing. Dust off those health and safety policies. You know, do they need to be updated? And again, you know, get those health and safety policies out to your people. Set out what the rules are, set out what the expectations are, and also warn your employees, you know, what's going to happen if you don't follow these rules. You know, is it a disciplinary offence? We mustn't forget that we will still have people working remotely, working from home. So again, we need to make sure we're doing risk assessments for those individuals as well, particularly around computer screens and seating positions. And, you know, look at ACAS. They've got some guidance on their website, and the Health and Safety Executive as well. So I would really encourage you to go and have a look at some of those websites as well. But what's another big challenge that we think we're going to see, Barry?
I think simply readjusting to being back in an office or workplace environment is going to be a huge issue. And I know, talking to colleagues around how we might be planning to do that, that you can see there's concern around PPE and how things are going to work, and, you know, social distancing. And staff may have been shielding or have real concerns about returning to work because of the experiences they've had, either directly or with family members. You know, so what's that going to look like for them? There could be, and I think there will be, real apprehension around returning to work and real anxiety for a great many people. You know, for those returning from furlough to work after such a long period of absence, they may feel, you know, very differently to the business than they did before they left. Will their confidence have been impacted? Do they need coaching? Do they need some training to help them get back into the workplace and back into a working routine? You know, mentoring might be something to think about for them. Emma, what reassurances should employers be thinking about?
Yeah, thank you, Barry. And I think you know, looking at our policies and our processes, and really getting those out to our people. I think there's a real opportunity here to be really positive in our messaging. You know, so think about, you know, what steps your managers can take, your leaders can take to really, you know, encourage and engage your people in you know, the return to work discussions, as well as what return to work will look like. So, you know, I've got some employers that are doing virtual tours of the office, you know, sort of, you know, videos of what it's going to look like, and obviously what's going to be different as well. And I think that sort of normalization is a really good piece. You know, another good takeaway would be looking at some training. So what training do we need on health and safety, the new ways of working? And again, developing this communication plan, as we've said, in conjunction with your staff and with your people. And, you know, when we talk about well-being, you know, it's about how we can support our people with the return and the anxieties that they may have. But also, you know, this has been a really anxious time for people. People have suffered bereavements, and people have been shielding. They live with somebody who has been shielding, or they are a vulnerable individual. So what's really important is going to be, you know, trying to talk to your people, encourage them to come forward, but thinking about what other resources that you have available to you as an employer. So, for example, do you have an employee assistance program that you might be able to offer to your staff? But again, getting your people to come forward early, and that's really important, because if we've got time, we can talk to our individuals, we can help them, we can offer them some coaching and some mentoring and some training. But I think it's really important that your managers know how to spot the signs, and they can encourage that early discussion with their people. And we've been thinking a lot within the team, within the training academy, about what support we can offer to employers and also to the wider employee population at this time. And we've got some opportunities here that you might want to take advantage of. So on the 17th of June, through our Boys Town of Coaching, we are running some facilitated workshops, really focusing on how coaching can support both your individuals, your teams, and also your wider culture, you know, during the next sort of 6 months. So the first of our sessions is going to be on the 17th of June, and they are facilitated workshop sessions. Next, we are running, and we have run webinars, either live or pre-recorded, for your wider employee population. So really focusing on that idea of stress and resilience, how we can, you know, really work on those sort of pinch points, particularly around the return to work. And they're really a great way to engage with your people and to share information. So again, if you're interested in running some live or pre-recorded webinars for your wider employee populations, and again, do get in touch. And then for managers, as I've said, it's really important for them to engage with this, to be able to spot those signs, to feel confident about having these conversations. So again, we're running on the 14th of July, a public course, so you're very welcome to book onto that. It's virtual. 90 minutes, how to spot the signs, how to have those conversations, and how to support your people. So again, a great opportunity there to be able to join with other like-minded professionals and really share those experiences. So I will be sending out information about that. But, you know, ultimately, Barry, we might be finding, and managers might be finding, some resistance to returning to work. So what advice can we give to those managers?
I think, as you said, it's really important to keep communicating with employees about plans and asking that those with concerns to come forward and come forward early and explain what their concerns are. So some employers may have to make adjustments to a person's working patterns or environment if they have a disability. And we must remember that equality rules are still really important in all of this. Some employers may use a phased return or look at other changes such as staggered hours. You know, can people come in after the rush hour and leave before or after, come in before or after the rush hour or leave before or after the rush hour? So they're not traveling at high peak flow times. And if we come back to more normal hours of working. If an employer has an employee who says they don't feel safe about coming to work, then, you know, we need to find out why. All employees will have a different concern and factors around their life which will cause them to have concerns. You know, there may be underlying health issues which we don't know about. So managers knowing their teams, anticipating issues and dealing with those issues early is really important.
No, absolutely. And I've been banging that drum. For those of you who've attended training courses with me or heard me speak before, this part about knowing your teams, knowing your people, being able to anticipate those problems is so important, not just when discussing return to work, but in other areas of employee management as well. And, you know, we have seen claims, there are claims coming through the Employment Tribunal where employees have claimed that they have been dismissed or treated less favourably because they feel that returning to work or being at work places them at serious and imminent risk of danger to their health and safety. And there is protection under the Employment Rights Act for those individuals who have that reasonable belief that returning to work or being at work places their health at serious risk, serious and imminent risk. That right is for employees at the moment, but just, you know, a bit of HR heads up, that right is being extended to workers from the 31st of May. So please do be aware of that. Now, what these cases coming through the Employment Tribunal have shown is that it's really important that employers can demonstrate that they've worked with the individual, that they've listened to them. They haven't just made assumptions, but also that employers can show, and they've got evidence to show, the steps they have taken to protect health and safety. So they've got their risk assessments, they've got their COVID-19 risk assessments, so they've got that evidence, and that's really important to have that protection there.
Absolutely. Claims of this nature have historically been very rare, but we may well now see a surge in them because employees who don't want to come back to work because of their concerns may may be forced to rely upon this because it gives them a right to claim unfair dismissal automatically. So best practice would be, as we said, to listen to the employee and try and accommodate them where practical. You know, having the evidence that you've taken steps to make your business COVID secure, and then heard the concerns the employee has, and if necessary, adjusting what you've done to take account of those concerns, is going to be the best line of defense. Ultimately, if employees are refusing to come to work and that refusal is unreasonable, we need to think about how we as employers are going to manage this. You know, refusal might be a failure to follow a reasonable instruction, so that might lead to a disciplinary sanction. But equally, you know, we need to make sure that our other employees see that we've dealt with these people reasonably and fairly, because what we don't want to do is create an environment where people have another fear arising from COVID. So careful handling and management of these issues is going to be key, both from a legal perspective and also from a management perspective.
No, absolutely. And I think that this, I think that, managers having that confidence to really manage those conversations, those difficult conversations, let's face it, there isn't a how to book about it. But again, we want to give your managers this opportunity. And again, HR, as well, this is a course open for you as well. We're going to be running, and I'm really excited about this one, we're going to be running a course where we will be looking at how do we manage those difficult conversations, how do we manage those crucial conversations, not just in return to work, how do we manage them in other areas of employee management, but also with clients and customers as well. So running this with Dr. Jonathan Smith, who is a performance coach and psychologist, works with Paralympic, Olympic sports teams, as well as corporate clients as well. So a really great opportunity. Again, it's virtual, please join. Learn from others, learn from Jonathan. Again, they're public courses, so you can book your place. But again, we are happy to run courses in-house as well. So again, look out for invites to that course because it's going to be absolutely fantastic. So Barry, what are businesses going to do? Is it time to ditch the flex, or are we going to embrace it? So just wanted to share some statistics that have come up from the Institute of Facilities Management, which surveyed, I think it was around sort of 2,000 workers, and the majority of which, surprise, surprise, said that they expected to move to a hybrid working pattern. So research found, and it was nearly half of those surveyed, said that they expect to work from home and be in the office for maybe 3 or fewer days a week. The findings also revealed that 63% of employees now believe that their office space to be unnecessary, which is a rise of a fifth since the first lockdown. So Barry, is hybrid working, do we think, going to be the way forward?
Well, looking at the poll, which, as you say, surveyed around 2,000 office workers in March this year, it shows that demand for hybrid working is particularly prevalent in the younger age group. So 2/3 the 18 to 24-year-olds, so 66%, admitted that not being offered flexible work patterns would cause them to look for a new job. So there's a generational element to this. For those of you who've carried out your own workplace service, it'd be really interesting to know whether your results are in line with that or very different. Hybrid working demands a rethink of our HR processes and policies, not just a working from home policy, but also around IT use, data protection, booking holidays and performance indicators. We might also see a rise in the number of flexible working requests as people decide they want to return or retain their flexibility in the way they balance their day and childcare issues. And that home working, frankly, is really for them. There are statutory rules relating to flexible working requests, and such requests must be managed in a reasonable way and within a fixed time frame of 3 months.
Yeah, no, I think the point about flexible working requests is going to be really interesting, isn't it? Whether we will see a rise. And again, stick in the chat if you're finding that you are receiving more flexible working requests. But I think this sort of the hybrid model and managing teams flexibly or working remotely, I think is really going to ask a lot of our managers. And, during, through the HR Training Academy, we've been running courses for managers and for HR about how to run and manage our remote teams and our hybrid teams. And it really does call upon managers to really think about their management styles and how can we learn those sort of tips and techniques to really improve, particularly employee engagement. I think it's going to require us looking at our technology. So how can we make that technology work seamlessly wherever you are, so in the office or at home. I think hybrid working is going to make us think about our workplace culture and how, again, we can keep that culture, keep that employee brand, keep that employee engagement. I also think it's really important that we think about our new and emerging talent. How can we support those new people to our organisation? How can they feel embedded within that organisation, but then thinking about their own experiences, attending meetings, listening to telephone calls, in the legal profession, shadowing solicitors at tribunals. So again, all of those learning, mentoring and development issues as well. And I think there will be a shift. I think there will be a shift in obviously how we manage performance. We have very much an approach on presenteeism, and I think we will potentially see a shift there to looking more at an output approach. But again, these are all things that are going to sort of, come out of our shift from, being in the office to being sort of working remotely. So again, how will we measure performance over time?
I think that's a really important issue, and there are many positives as well as practical and legal issues for businesses to consider as we transition into a potentially new way of working, and these will depend on your business and your culture. There's also pressure on business to return to work to get it right the first time. I'm not sure that's going to be really possible. I think employees don't know what it is they necessarily want and what they want today. They may want something different in 6 months' time. And for me, it's been important to come, and I'm in the office today. And it's quite nice to come into the office and then actually go out and see people, walk into a shop, buy a sandwich, buy a cup of coffee, and do something that's more normal rather than just sit at home. Now, will people want to be doing that more as we go 6 months or 12 months into the future? Or will they be very happy to say, well, I'm happy to do that one day a week and I can live with the rest of it? That's a real issue. And I think a legal issue that I came across was we've had a lot of cases on work and working time and what counts as work. And a lot of that relates to the strictures around, well, how far away do you have to be from your working place? And if everybody's working at home and that's their workplace, well, there may be claims being brought around working time and pay that people are receiving if they're not able to go away, if they're stuck at home and they have to answer the phone. Then we could see people bringing claims saying, well, my working time is actually quite large and therefore I need to be paid for the time I'm working. But that's something that may take a couple of years to run through, but it's an issue that
yeah, and we saw there was a recent ONS survey that came out looking at, working from home, where are employees working over, I think, sort of a 10-year period. And it also talked about, pay and benefits as well between employees who predominantly worked at home and employees that worked, on site. And the ONS found that individuals who predominantly work from home do 6 hours, I think it was a week, of unpaid overtime every week. And, we've heard lots of stories, haven't we, about, people working excessive hours over the last sort of 15 months. We've heard a lot about burnout. And I think there will be this issue about, well, where does work end and home begin? And we've seen this sort of convergence, haven't we, of the two. And I think that's going to be really important to think about, are we going to have, within our sort of framework of work, core hours, or this idea that you're not going to look at you're not looking at your emails, after a certain time. And I think, again, it's about respecting how people want to work. Some people love sending emails at midnight or 2 a.m. because that's just them and that's just how they work. Yeah. But if you're receiving an email at 6 a.m. or 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever it might be, you feel that pressure and that sense of, oh my goodness, my boss is sending an email at this time, I need to be working. So I think it's about, having those ground rules and respecting how other people want to work.
Yes, Sorry,
Yeah,
Emma,
no, sorry, Barry, carry on.
we've seen legislation in France and Italy around the right to digitally disconnect, and that exists in other parts of the world as well. The Irish have moved and made some changes to their code of practice. We don't have a right to disconnect, but you see some employers will have employees putting on the bottom of their email, I'm sending this to you now because it suits me, but you don't have to feel you need to reply now. Will we be seeing more of that? Or do we actually need a national or an international right to disconnect? Our employees going to be able to say, all right, this is now my personal space.
Absolutely. And I think, at this point, a part of sort of, workplace planning, having that discussion around, creating that culture of a working balance, I think is really important as part of this sort of overall discussion about how we want to work, where we want to work, and when we want to work. So it's sort of, part and parcel of this, that sort of, employee well-being piece. And I think linked to that and linked to this idea of, where we're working, how we're working, is this idea of the rise of the tribe. And again, it'd be interesting to hear from others if they've experienced this as well. And we've got a lot of managers out there who are managing not just a 2-tier workforce, but a 3-tier workforce where you've got some in, some out, some on furlough. And again, as we begin to lift lockdown and we start bringing our individuals back from furlough, it's going to be really interesting to see if we're going to develop this this concept of the tribe. But as we know, furlough is ending, or well, we think it's ending at the end of September. Certainly no murmurings at the moment, but hey, we've been wrong before. So, and we're going to start seeing that tapering off from July. But for those who've been on furlough, as Barry said, it's a really long time, and does this gradual return to work, we need to think about how we're going to sort of handle that fairly, as well as what it's going to look like having our three-tier workforce sort of merging back together. Barry.
So while many employers are continuing to use rotation or flexible furlough to deal with their staffing issues, some too may be looking at the dates and when they're going to have to start continuing to pay furlough pay. Is that what they want to do? And thinking more long term about their workforce and workforce planning. So we might, come July, begin to see redundancies starting again as part of a management process. So again, people need to think carefully about timing, numbers, and fair redundancy processes. Consultation is important, collective consultation. And remember that processes may, as I say, result in collective consultation and individual redundancy. So again, think about this. How's it going to be managed? How are you going to communicate it? We need to ensure fairness of selection and process. And we'd be very happy to speak to employers about redundancies and planning and ensuring that it's done in as fair a way as possible to minimize the number of claims that are being made. And particularly, where people have been on furlough and you have to make a selection between those who've been working and those on furlough, it may be very difficult to select a fair process, to use a fair process to select out. And you may have to look back some considerable time to get that information, which may be very unfair if somebody who's been on furlough is being selected, or somebody who's not been on furlough is being selected for redundancy, as opposed to someone who's been on furlough for the last 12 months.
No, I think the redundancy, process and discussions around that and the planning are going to be very, are going to, throw up a lot of issues for employers. So as Barry said, do get in touch if you need some help and support with that, maybe around sort of, settlement agreements as well. Then do get in touch. But I do think that, we might see this sort of culture develop of, within our teams. So, are you an in or are you an out? And will remote working lead to this sort of culture of out of sight, out of mind creeping in, and how can managers ensure that work is distributed fairly? Potentially there we've got issues between work being given to the people who are present, and potentially they may be more men want to come into the office and maybe more women want to stay at home. So again, the strides that we've made in terms of equality of opportunity, again, we're going to have to start looking at that and making sure that we are ensuring that there is fair reward, fair distribution of work between those individuals who are at work and those who are at home.
So I think the issues around the tribe are particularly going to come with businesses who have different teams or areas of the business working in different ways. And that may be appropriate. So some parts of the business you have have to be in because that's what the work requires, and other parts that, well, they can maybe do a hybrid model, and other parts still who can mainly work from home. It's going to be very difficult for them. So that could lead to conflict, but it's important to ensure consistency around messaging to make sure that their leadership plans are aligned. So there's a clear communication and a role/client approach leading the way there. And this will, of course, vary by sector and also by job role. Perhaps adopting a working framework with clearly agreed patterns and expectations of work, having a clear internal approach as to how businesses will manage the return, including for those who are reluctant to return, will avoid knee-jerk reactions and inconsistent approaches. And the inconsistency is going to be the really difficult bit, because that could lead, if we've got different parts of the business operating different ways, and perhaps more women having to be in than men, that could lead to discrimination claims. And again, across the ages as well, you may get age discrimination claims if the younger employees who are more junior have to be in and the more senior employees are at home. Again, you could see people feeling that they've been subject to discrimination.
No, and I think linked to this, around sort of communication and health and safety, one area that is coming up, crossing the HR desk, is around information and data, and in particular around health information. So Baron and I just want to spend some time just talking about this topic as well. And we've certainly heard that some employers are wanting to adopt a no jab or no jab, no job policy in respect of both existing and new staff. And some of your staff as well may have asked questions about vaccine status of their colleagues. And what I would say about vaccinations in employment is firstly that employers need to think really carefully before adopting any sort of vaccination status or no jab, no job policy, because there are some real legal, there are discriminatory issues, there are contractual issues, as well as cultural and ethical considerations. And also, the health and safety executive, they have said that, the vaccination status of your workforce doesn't impact on those health and safety requirements, those health and safety obligations as well. And similarly with testing, what are the business's objective and health and safety reasons for insisting that testing is to be done? Why is this necessary? Why are we asking individuals to do this? Why are we asking individuals to provide such information? So why is it necessary? And then is it justifiable? There will of course be sectorial differences. There may be job role differences in terms of which employers may well be able to objectively justify. But I think my advice on the whole would be to think very carefully about your health and safety measures, your practices, your protocols, and also sickness and absence management more generally and more holistically. Many employers are looking at promoting good health management and vaccinations more generally, rather than sort of, giving sort of specific information or making specific requests. It isn't simple, of course, but it's really important to be asking those questions. Can you achieve what you want to in another way? What's reasonable for your business? Why is it reasonable for you as an employer to be asking your individuals to be providing this information, or to be undergoing testing, or to be making vaccinations compulsory? So think really carefully what's justified, what's reasonable, what's necessary, and if it's not, then ask yourselves, why do we need them?
And so, Emma, you focused on sort of the issue of testing, but testing and collecting information, and this information is data, raises another huge issue for employers, because we have to comply with the GDPR. So employers need to think really carefully about the type of information they hold or intend to, and how such information is going to be used, stored and maintained. So if employers are thinking about asking their employees for their vaccination status, why are they asking the question? Why is that information needed? All employers are going to have a privacy notice, hopefully, relating to employees and workers, and many may not include biometric data, and this would be part of that biometric data. because generally employers don't collect biometric data at the moment. But one can see that possibly changing. But biometric data needs to be stored and looked after in a different way because it's sensitive personal data. So if you're thinking about testing for COVID-19 or any other data of that nature, my advice would be to tell the employees you're doing it and why, how that will be done, how the data will be stored, and obtain their specific consent to getting that and storing that data. With health information, including information about vaccines, it's important that employers think about why they need to know and also place more emphasis on keeping that information secure. So you may need to keep that away from the personnel file in an area where only a limited number of people can actually get access to it, rather than a much wider number of people, because again, it's so sensitive that you need the extra controls and parameters in place to prevent unnecessary access. And we've seen that, slightly in a different setting with the police accessing information and people now being potentially prosecuted, police officers being prosecuted for accessing data that they shouldn't have had access to. There won't be prosecutions in the same way, but you can see that would be problematic for employers if people were unnecessarily accessing data they shouldn't have access to.
No, absolutely. And I think, it's those, sort of the employment side of things, but also the data side of things. And it really isn't a simple, a simple thing as just sending an email to an individual saying, can you provide me with information? And I think, employers need to be really thinking about those data protection obligations. The Information Commission has got some information on their website, but really, what is that legitimate reason? We think about data protection, what's that legitimate reason for wanting that information, holding it and storing it? And employers will need to be undertaking one of these data protection impact assessments. So, not just health and safety risk assessment, but data protection risk assessment as well. So just to sort of add to that point about data protection, we can't forget our obligations under that, because, people having access to this information could be potentially incredibly serious, not just for the individual, but for your organization as well. So as well as data protection, what about our contracts of employment as well, in our employment policies? So we've talked about health and safety. Let's dust those off and have a look at those. But also, what are we doing about holiday? What are we doing about holiday and sick pay? Pay benefits, have they been impacted? Do we need to think about our incentives? Do we need to look at our schemes and our benefits? Do we have enough flexibility should this situation arise again? We've got the holiday season coming up, we've got half term, we've got the summer coming up. There's a lot of individuals with a lot of holiday that's been stored up. So again, how are we going to manage those holiday requests? What are we doing about our holiday policies? So again, it might be worth just having I think about the mechanics of how employees are going to request holiday, particularly if they're working remotely.
And employers may also need to think about, associated with holidays, travel policies and how these might be impacted or restricted. I mean, employees now asking for a holiday, you may have to ask where they're going to go. Are they going to go to a green country or an amber country? Because if they're going to go to an amber country and have to be quarantined, well, that may not actually work for you as an employer. And that's a question that one's never really thought about, having to ask for where you may ask where they're going out of interest, but now it may be a really important fundamental question, because if their status of the country they're in changes whilst they're away, they may have to quarantine when they come back in a way that they wouldn't have had to do before. So layoff, future furlough and deduction from wages are also issues that need to be thought about, and whether we need to be thinking about introducing those into contracts of employment in case we have a further shutdown. Hopefully we don't, but it's always a risk. Home working, what are the rules and expectations? Do you need a home working policy? And flexible working, and if there is a need to allow flexible working, would it be temporary or permanent? What are the rules around this? Are they in line with legal requirements? And we've talked about flexible working, but do employers need to think about saying to employees that because you don't want a tsunami of flexible working requests? You can see every employee saying, I want to work flexibly. Well, that may be problematic, but if an employer takes, if you take the lead and say, well, we're looking at this and we're trying to make something that works for the business for everybody, hold on to your flexible working request and let's see if we can accommodate you within everything else. Because what we don't want to do is is have everybody making a request, and some people getting it because they get in early, and other people being slightly slower off the mark, and being too late because everybody else has got their flexible working request, and you need 2 or 3 people in the office to do certain things. So
and of course, the ACAS guide says you take them, don't you, at the time. You consider the request at the time it's given to you. You can't sort of think, oh, well, I've got, you know, and other individuals who might want to make them. So I think that's an added layer, isn't it, of worry and confusion. Yeah, so, you know, don't forget your contracts, don't forget your policies. We've actually got, you know, a lot of clients who are using this time to go back and look at their contracts and look at their policies. So again, if that's something you want to do, or just to have a discussion about, you know, what you may or may not need, then again, you know, get in touch. Happy to have that discussion with you. We shouldn't underestimate, as I said at the beginning, how this, you know, how the last 15 months have impacted upon our workplace culture. And I think whether that's been positive or negative will really depend on the way that your business has reacted. So did it put measures in place quickly? Did it put measures in place that were fair? And how did it communicate? And did it have that collaborative approach of, you know, talking to your people, communicating with your people, and explaining what was going on? Were employees pressured into coming to work? What steps have you put in place to support you know, mental health and well-being? And how adaptable has your business been in terms of flexible and remote working? For some, certainly the last 15 months have sped up plans to introduce more hybrid working. And for others, it's changed their mindset that actually flexible working or remote working can actually work for them.
And will this make your business kinder and more adaptable to the needs of your people? Will we also now want to work in an environment that allows for a work-life balance, so our people do not have to change careers or employers? And I suppose one issue to think about when coming back is the actual office environment, because if we're coming back to a flexi working, no desk policy where you just take a desk that you have, if you look around the offices we had before we all disappeared back in March last year, everybody had personalized their workspace. Will people want to come back into a very depersonalized work area? You know, that may have an impact on people wanting to work for you or with you. It's very difficult. I mean, all those are things that have to be sorted out and worked through.
No, I think that's right. And this you know, idea that, you know, for a lot of people who worked from home or remotely before, there was this sense that, you know, people in the office don't get it. You know, they don't understand what it's like to work remotely. And, you know, perhaps those of you listening and thinking, oh, I've been in situations where work's been given and I've not been there, and, you know, this sort of, you know, out of sight, out of mind. So for some, it's been actually been quite a good leveler that actually now others understand what it's like to be a remote worker. And I think, but it's keeping that momentum and ensuring that as we move forward, with some people returning, maybe some not as often as others, how can we ensure that we've got that, you know, fair distribution, that equal distribution? And I think that's going to take some work as well on the part of businesses. So driving forward that opportunity, that equality of opportunity, but also, you know, supporting our new and our emerging talent as well. I think that's going to be another big issue for businesses moving in forward. So in summary, Barry, what can we say?
Well, I think as we move through the next few months, reopening workplaces and the economy may involve some false starts. We may not be 100% operational, and it's going to take time to ensure that health and safety measures are in place to support our returners, and also to make sure we support our home workers.
Absolutely. And I've put up a few sort of final thoughts on the slide there. I think, you know, it's still really important to stay up to date. You know, ACAS has got some information on their website, Health and Safety Executive, the Information Commissioner, as well as, you know, up-to-date information about furlough as well, particularly as we move through the next few months and the tapering off. Communication is going to be key. How can we tell our people and tell them early what we're thinking? Get their you know, their views on board as well, and how we can respond to that. And I think, you know, being open and listening, you know, where are the issues, getting our people to come forward and come forward early. Again, be open. What lessons can we learn? What's worked over the last year and what hasn't? And how can we flex what we do to be agile and to make things work? And as Barry said, you know, we might not get it right first time. And I think, you know, for some, it they may not be returning to work. So it might be, it's really important again that we really focus on that fairness and that those fairness of procedures. And I think there's going to be a balance, isn't it? What can we do in the short term and what's going to be over the long term? And again, as I've said many times during the last 15 months, this is still very much a marathon and not a sprint.
I think that's very true, Emma. And there are a lot of unknowns. What we do know is that we look beyond lockdown at the roadmap for change. Employees are unlikely to be returning to the same workplace they left. A lot of clients of mine are talking about changing the workspace, reducing the area of office space they take. So there's lots of property work going on around taking leases for a longer period, but over a shorter area. And businesses that proactively consider all of this now are going to be much better placed, both to retain people and also to attract new people to come to them, because they'll be working in a way that people have got used to. And you know, I've talked to people who said, well, I wouldn't take that job because there was no flexibility in it. I had to go to the office 5 days a week. I'm not interested in that. I want to have some flexibility. I want to be able to put my children to bed at time when they want to go to bed, and I want to be there. So that's really important, because we've got used to working in that way. And whether that stays over the coming years, who knows? But we don't have to look for the next few years. We need to look for the next 6 months. And I appreciate that it's very difficult to sort of tie in what people want and what the business wants, because there's huge cost associated with maintaining office space. And if people aren't using it, there's a big question about, well, why do we retain it? So people need to think very carefully about what they're going to do.
Absolutely. And I think there's lots of discussions in there about the employee experience. And I think there's going to be a balance between the employee experience on one hand, but also, you know, the client expectations as well. And I think that's going to form a lot of the discussions over the next few months. And as we've said, you know, not feeling that there is that pressure to make the decision now, keep it under review, because as we've said, you know, people will change and businesses will change as well. So thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions. What we'll do, Kerry, if you want to just, if there's some that maybe we can deal with in there that appear to be quite sort of easy to deal with. If not, we will come back to people separately, because I'm conscious of time.
There's one question on travel expenses, which I've had a look through, and I will answer it in more detail afterwards, because it's quite a complicated question. But I think if people are and it's about working from home and employees don't having to travel to the office, is that a claimable expense? And I think the answer to that question really depends on where their place of work is. If they're allowed to work from home, but their place of work is remain to the office, then no, absolutely not. But I will look in more detail, because it is really a tax question rather than an employment question. So I'll come back to that, but I'll pick that one up. And there was another question. I can't now can't get to it.
Do you want me to ask it, Barry? I've got it here.
If you could, please.
Yeah, so it's from Emma. So thank you for this. So Emma's asked, can we legally ask where our employees are going on holiday? And what can we do if they need to self-isolate upon their return, where this impacts their ability to fully perform their duties?
Well, I think employers can say, well, if you're going on holiday and you come back and you're going to have to quarantine and you therefore can't perform your duties in any way, shape or form, then that's got to be holiday, hasn't it? I can't see it can be anything else. It's certainly not. They're not ready, willing, and able to work. Mm-hmm. I think, and that may dissuade employees from wanting to go on holiday or go travel abroad. But I don't see that it has to be the employer who bears the cost of that.
I think having that communication and being clear and upfront with your people about, you know, what the expectations are, you know, whether it's you take holiday or unpaid leave, but, you know, being very clear that, you know, what you expect. That's
absolutely right. And people need to know before they travel what will be the answer if they come back and have to quarantine. If they find out when they've come back, you can see they're being quite upset about it. But having a very clear policy in place so that people know is absolutely the best thing to do.
Yeah, and it's also about that consistency point as well, isn't it? So, you know, making sure that everybody knows what the expectations are, so you don't have, you know, managers in one team dealing with it one way and managers in another dealing with it in another. So again, it's really important to have that consistency of messaging across the businesses and across your teams. We've had a couple more. I think due to time, what we'll do is we will, as Barry said, we'll come back and we'll produce an FAQ, because I think these are issues that are going to be across your desks when people think, oh, what about this, what about this? So again, you know, it's one that it is a movable feast. But just to say thank you so much for joining us today. I will be sending out information about our training courses, those opportunities to join us in those public sessions. Do take the opportunity to join those courses, because it's really great not just to learn from us or our speakers, but also learn from each other and share experiences as well. And I think that's been lacking over the last few months. There is a listen again facility. We will be sending our link to our YouTube channel, so you will be receiving that. But in the meantime, thank you so much. And Barry and I look forward to seeing you soon at another webinar or a training course. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emma.